Hello and welcome to episode 101 of the Ego Chall Podcast. My name is Preston Byers, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host Justin Binkowski. And on today's episode, some potential roster mania drama in Carolina, potentially some GAs potentially being broken, which is pretty much like a weekly occurrence at this point. And we are finally back with the CDL. The CDL is finally back after a multiple week-long break for the holidays, and so are we. So we will be doing predictions at the end of the show, which I know a lot of people probably enjoy. But before we get to any of that, how are you doing, Bink?
I'm doing all right. For long-time Ego Chall fans, a little bit of a late night show here. Might be reminiscent of some of the earlier days, but we're back at a later time now. But hope everyone had happy holidays, happy New Year, all that good stuff. We took a little bit of a break outside of Preston's one solo video, but now the CDL's kicking back into high gear this week, and so are we.
Yeah, a happy New Year to everyone. Hope 2024 is a great one for all of our listeners and viewers. Of course, the CDL, hopefully it has a very good 2024. It may not. Who knows at this point? But a lot of people make like New Year's resolutions. I think one of the New Year's resolutions should be no breaking GAs in the CDL. That should be every CDL player's New Year's resolution. But Abuzah, he broke GAs, I guess, according to the Flank, the Twitter account. They said CDL pros have accused Abuzah and the Surge of breaking single tap sprint GAs after viewing clips from December's matches. Is this anything to you? Is this on your radar? Do you care much at all about this kind of thing?
No, I mean, one thing I think that has to be taken into account is obviously potentially like some language barrier for Abuzah and stuff like that. Like it might have just been something that he was playing on in challengers in the past and wasn't, like he didn't understand he needed to change it or something. I don't know the situation or anything like that. But that was one thought that came to my mind. But it's interesting. It was potentially caught now. Um, Seattle got off to a hot start. Then they had some tougher matches after that, and obviously, I don't think a minor setting like this was necessarily any reason why Seattle was able to get some early dubs. But it's definitely, in my opinion, at least, better that it was caught now. If it was actually a thing, and it's taken care of, fixed, whatever's got to be done, and then hopefully, moves on past this, and someone like Abuzah is able to show what he's capable of because he definitely looked good in his matches, regardless of whatever setting he was or wasn't using, and you would hate for someone to like discredit what he's doing, especially just based off of like 4 online matches beforehand. Now potentially, whatever happened, get it out of the way, and now he's able to, come back and hopefully, shut down any rumors or any speculation like that and show what he's capable of.
Feels like a league-wide conspiracy to mess with my Surge. After they had a very strong start to the season, the league is now coming in and trying to ruin whatever they have going for the Major One qualifiers. In all seriousness, I don't really care at all about single tap GAs. I think this is one of the sillier, less less damning GAs. Like it's not snaking. I totally get snaking GAs, even though I don't think they're really enforceable. Single tap is like it's a small change. So I don't really care all that much, but I can definitely understand why pros do.
It really, in the long run, just might be the difference between having to get a new controller mid-season or getting one at the end of the season. So,
Yeah.
um, head Ego Chall correspondent Tremor in the chat saying single tap not as bad as ATS, but still an advantage, and that single tap helps with snaking. So, um, you know, regardless of whether it was or wasn't being used, if it was being used, I just think right now, it being potentially found during this like dead period during the holiday break, whatever you want to call it, is like the best timing possible because now if it wasn't being used and people are just like tweaking about clips or whatever, he can just be like, no, I wasn't using it, and we move on from it there. Or if he was, he fixes it and moves on from there. So I think it's a minor hiccup, and um, hopefully we're just for Seattle's sake and people supporting that team and whatnot. It's just something that everyone moves on from quickly, and then someone like Abuzah is able to show what he's capable of afterwards.
Yeah, of course. Next thing, which is the most recent, happened today, not even 5 hours ago, but Clayster, he tweeted about a breaking point tweet. So the breaking point tweet was that the Carolina Royal Ravens are looking at replacing Real, and that according to the Stocksman, multiple players are being targeted. Clayster quote tweeted, said, "Wrong. We've been plan Bing and seeing if we could find a replacement for this weekend's matches. Jose Real is in the last steps of his visa process and could get approved by this weekend. We're just making sure we have a failsafe." I have no reason to believe that Clayster is lying about any of that, and that would make a lot of sense. Obviously, Real, one of the European players in the league from Spain, and visa issues have been a thing throughout the CDL's history, and even before the CDL, certain players have just had more trouble staying or getting into the United States on a consistent basis. Zero is the best example that comes to my mind, at least the past few years, where he pretty much was benched for an entire season essentially because of visa issues. So it's obviously an issue for some people, and I hope everything gets worked out for Real. Your thoughts on this, because Carolina is in a precarious situation where they really need these next few matches to go their way, because if they keep losing, they will end up in the losers bracket at Major 1, which puts them behind the 8 ball, so to speak, for pretty much the rest of the season, trying to play catch up with some of the other teams. So what do you think about this potential substitution for Carolina?
Yeah, I mean, it really sucks for Real for a multitude of reasons. Just in a situation where he even is able to get the visa sorted and get back here, like he's going to be on limited practice, and then like you said, Carolina, potentially, or not potentially, but just having a relatively rough start to start the year. Um, these next couple matches coming up for them are important. Could be the difference between starting and winners or losers at the first major. Kind of sets the tone for the whole season. All that stuff you were saying. And the negative side of that is in a world where Real doesn't get the visa sorted, Carolina like has to pick up a sub or whatever. He's kind of in a situation where if that sub performs well, he could just be, for lack of a better term, shit out of luck and, on the bench afterwards if whoever they pick up does well and Carolina starts winning, they might just stick with that squad and he's, on the outside looking in for the rest of the year potentially. So it's a really tough situation all around. Hopefully for his sake, I don't know the whole situation. I saw something on Twitter like he was, I know for a fact I saw in like some scrims early for launch that he was competing overseas because he just had super high ping and everyone else didn't. And then for the matches, I believe somebody said he was playing from Toronto's facility, and then he went home back overseas for the holidays and stuff like that. So potentially scrimming and stuff like that overseas now, even still isn't optimal practice. It would just for a rookie like him to have his real first test in the CDL be like sort of like marred by all these hiccups and obstacles. It's just not what you want, and hopefully for his sake he's able to get the visa stuff situated so he can come over here and show what he's capable of. But it definitely is it's got to be just a tough spot to be in because like I said, in a world where Carolina does find a sub and they find success with that sub, or the sub just plays well, it could be a short stint for Real in the starting lineup. I guess to play devil's advocate too, that it could be a world where they pick up a sub, that sub doesn't play well, and then Real is able to get the visa situation sorted and come back over here and slot right back into the lineup. But that's definitely, that's not a situation you want to be in. If putting myself in his position or anything like that, I definitely just want to have my own destiny in my own hands and not have to worry about someone's other performance and whatnot dictating whether I get the spot that I really had to start the year. And so yeah, it's going to be one to keep an eye on. Kind of like you said, Carolina's in a spot right now where they kind of need to try and turn things around quickly, or else, like you said, it could impact their entire season. Really, we've seen it countless times now in the CDL where teams get off to a slow start and then they try to dig themselves out of a hole super late in the season. It's just, too little too late. So, um, yeah, we'll have to see how this plays out for Carolina.
The good thing is if it is only a one weekend thing, and who knows, that could be the case, it might not be. But if it is only this weekend, Carolina only has one match on the schedule, so it would not impact multiple matches if it were contained to just this week. But it seems like a very winnable match for them against Minnesota. So, like you were saying, excuse me, in traditional sports, it's more injuries that come into this when a quarterback goes down with an injury, and that quarterback was doing really well before that injury, and then the backup comes in and the backup does well. The dilemma that the coach always has is, do you put the starter back in because they didn't lose their job due to performance or anything, they lost it due to injury, or do you keep going with your backup even though they didn't necessarily win that job, they were just given it. And I think you made a good point. If Carolina were to have a substitute and they did win this match, or they won a few, and they've now looked better over the next 2 or 3 matches versus the first 4 matches that they had Real, do they end up sticking with that player in the hope that things will continue to progress, or do they go back to Real? It's going to be a dilemma if this does end up coming to fruition, and Carolina actually has to field a substitute in some of their CDL matches. It's going to be pretty interesting to watch, but hopefully everything gets worked out and Real is back with the Royal Ravens this weekend. We didn't have anything else to talk about in terms of the CDL. Obviously, the league has been on a break and there hasn't been much drama. People have been on their best behavior. Maybe they were hoping that Santa would bring them gifts, or maybe it was a New Year's resolution that they wouldn't roast each other, accuse each other of stuff on social media, or maybe it's just 8 days into the year and it hasn't happened yet, but it certainly will. So that's all we had in terms of news, but we do have some predictions as the CDL is coming back this Friday, January 12th. Of course, all of these matches are online, as is the case with any of the qualifying matches for this season. But we're going to have, I believe this is 11 matches this weekend, starting on Friday and going through Sunday. So Friday, January 12th, we have 3 matches on hand. The first of which, LAG versus Atlanta FaZe. No shocker here. I'm going to go with FaZe because both of us are probably going to go with FaZe because we're not stupid.
I am excited for this one. And we'll get into LAG's second match of the weekend because I honestly don't really know where my head's at with that one. But just, LAG's performance against New York and before the holiday break and stuff definitely was an eye-opener and showed what this squad is capable of. So seeing how they stack up against Atlanta could be exciting. Definitely going to pick Atlanta here too. But it could be another one that's a lot closer than people initially expected 100%, but it could be even closer than some people still expect now, even though, you just see LAG versus ATL on paper, and people are probably just going FaZe right off the bat. But yeah, I think it is potential for, especially first match after a break. Some craziness could happen here, but I'm definitely going to go with Atlanta.
Next match, Seattle versus Toronto. I think this is a really interesting matchup. It's going to be, it really depends because the Seattle that showed up against Optic and FaZe were not the best version, or, I wouldn't say that because those are just 2 really good teams, but like, we saw so much promise from Seattle in those first 2 matches, and then they, obviously didn't have favorable results in the next 2. And then Toronto looked, very strong in their first 2 matches, and then they got swept by Boston, who Seattle beat. So I really don't know what to expect. I'm gonna go with Toronto. Just thinking that match against Boston to finish out the second week, that was kind of a fluke. That wasn't necessarily indicative of what the Ultra have in store. So I'm gonna go with Toronto here.
Me too. I think this is another one, especially coming off a break. Could be Seattle practiced a lot more over the break than Toronto, or vice versa. You don't really know, but another one that I'm excited to see right off the rip here, but I'm definitely leaning Toronto.
Next match, New York and Minnesota. I don't think either of us are going to pick Minnesota. 3-0 Subliners versus 0-3 Rocker. Going to go with the Subliners.
Yep, Team New York here.
Next, we have Saturday, January 13th, my 26th birthday, if anybody's keeping track. 4 matches that day. First, Miami versus Seattle. Heretics obviously right at the top of the CDL standings heading into the break, 3-0. They have the best map win-loss percentage so far. Obviously not a great sample size, but still I don't think a lot of people were expecting them to start 3-0. I'm going to go with Seattle. Obviously I've been really riding hard for the Surge so far this season. And I think Miami, while I've been really impressed by them, and I do think that they're much better than, maybe people probably thought they would be like an easy bottom 4 team. I think that they're a little more competitive than that. I still think Seattle is probably the better team, so I'm going to go with the Surge.
Yeah, I'm going to take Miami. I had a feeling you were going to go with Seattle, so I kind of wanted to, especially after first couple of predictions here, kind of chalk. I wanted to make sure we had some that are different. So, this is another match on paper. This is kind of. I think we did the tier list last episode, and we kind of had like our top 4 still, and then we said Miami and Seattle were kind of in that tier below in like the 5th, 6th spots. So this is really like a battle to see how they stack up against one another. So it could go either way. But I'm gonna stick with the Vamos here and go Miami.
Yeah, definitely a big match for our tier list, and we'll probably redo or look at them again, either before or after Major 1 to see how things have been shaping up. Next match, Boston versus LAG. I have absolutely no idea what to do with this match because, like I mentioned earlier, Boston beat Toronto, but they lost to Seattle. They lost to LAT. They got swept by LAT, and then LAT gets swept by LAG, and so like I'm completely confused on what to make of either of these teams. I'm gonna go with LAG, but it's just a toss up. Flip a coin and whichever side, just go with that one.
I just looked really quick around my room to see if I had a coin here on top of my fridge or something, and I don't. I was gonna flip it if you didn't pick a team. I'm gonna go with Boston then. My gut was telling me LAG. I really just didn't know who to pick here though. So we'll make it interesting, and I'll go with Boston.
Yeah, it's just a really, really tough. It should give us some kind of idea of where these two teams stack up. They're in that big blob of teams where so far they haven't looked very impressive, but again, more matches can give us a better idea of where they're going to be when it comes to Major 1 or down the line even further. Next match, Toronto versus LAT. LAT hasn't looked very good, and I'm not saying that Toronto has necessarily looked the greatest, especially with that loss to Boston, and we'll see how they fare against the Surge on Friday. But I'm gonna still go with the Ultra. I just can't trust the Thieves at this point in time.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with Toronto too. Envoy's first match against his former team.
Revenge game.
You got, well, not really a revenge game if you leave and get the bag from another team.
Revenge game no matter what.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with Toronto here.
In the last match of Saturday, Optic versus Vegas. Well, Optic, they are 2-1 or 3-1, excuse me. They played 4 matches so far, and then Vegas is 1-3. I think this could be an interesting or a pretty competitive matchup, depending on the maps. Vegas has kind of, honestly, they should have one more win. They really choked it against Carolina, and they beat Minnesota. But I don't think they're on Optics level, so I'm gonna go with Optic Texas.
Yep, I'm on the Optic too.
And the last 4 matches, Sunday, January 14th, starting off with Vegas again against Atlanta FaZe. Not a great weekend for the Legion. I'm going to go with FaZe.
Me too.
Next match, Minnesota versus Carolina. This is, especially if Real is not a part of the team. We don't know at the time that we're recording this, so it's kind of anybody's guess at this point. Either way, I'm gonna go with Minnesota. I don't think that there's some big gap between the teams, even if Real's in the lineup. So I'm gonna go with the Rocker.
I think that's a safe pick. I am going to take Carolina.
Yeah.
I will think you will give me this one. I'm going to put an asterisk on it. If they have a substitute play, it's okay. I'll stick with the pick. If the substitute is Brian Saint or somebody who's not been a pro or an amateur lately, it's some coach, I get to change my pick.
I will, unless it is Marky B, and if it's Marky B, you have to stick to it.
Well, I don't think Marky. I think Marky B's with the Bance Challengers team, so I think I'm safe in that regard. But that's the only
just
thing.
his cover. He's secretly trying to get back into the CDL as a player.
I was trying to look. I don't think they have. Let's see if there is one on this official CDL site listed for Carolina.
I don't think so.
View roster. No, it's just the 4 of them. But does any? Well, Boston has Pentagram. Let's see if it lists him. Okay, so Boston does list them. Boston has Kremp listed still too. I don't think that's true.
Yeah, I don't think that is.
Let's see, Atlanta has Classic listed, so it doesn't look like Carolina's in the spot. Let's see if Vegas has a Theory listed. They do. That makes me laugh. But okay, so yeah, it doesn't look like we have a coaching sub situation potentially for Carolina, but so that's the only caveat in my Carolina pick. I'm gonna stick with them. I think this is, a winnable match for them. It's really I think you called it like a sort of like a mini blow it up bowl for kind of being dramatic for this early in the season, but really like for how the two teams have played so far in the limited sample size, like this is almost a must win match for both of these squads. So it's kind of a fortunate situation a little bit for both teams. If you look at it, like Minnesota has a chance to get their first win and get on the board against a team that's potentially fielding a substitute. At the same time, Carolina potentially has to play with a substitute, but it's not like it's not in a match against Atlanta or one of the top squads that you might be at an immediate disadvantage against. It's still would be at a disadvantage from a chemistry standpoint, practice standpoint, all that stuff. But so yeah, this is definitely an interesting one. We'll have to keep an eye on in terms of seeing how the visa plays out for Real and what squad will actually be playing against Minnesota. But I'll go with Carolina for now.
Yeah, I was just looking at the Challengers rosters from last year for Godorex and Gwyn, whether somebody is like a logical fit to come into Carolina and just do a match, practice a little bit, play a match, and kind of get on your way. Yeez is a potential idea because he played with Gwyn in Godorex and won Challengers finals last year, and he's in Challengers at the moment, so they wouldn't need to do anything weird. I was thinking of Classic, but the Classic, I believe, is still with FaZe as their substitute. Yeah. I don't think that they're going to be just offering Classic up, even though that would be cool if Nicky D could play in the CDL at least one more time. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see whether Real is able to play, and if not, who fills in for him against Minnesota. Last 2 matches of the weekend, New York versus LAT. Gonna go with the subliners. Like I said, can't really trust LAT at this point in the subliners. As obviously they might lose their one match to Minnesota. That would be shocking. But I would imagine they'll be 4-0 heading into this match.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with New York here too. I think it's pretty straightforward, especially based on how both squads have played so far.
Last match of the weekend, Boston versus Miami, the Eastern Conference Finals, if you will, of the CDL. I do think that the Heretics will win, but I'm not. Again, this is kind of if Miami can win this, and especially if they can win against Seattle, that would really do so much for at least my interpretation of where they are in the league, because that would give them two more wins over the teams that we think are in the middle tier or somewhere in that bottom tier. That would essentially give them space and elevate them possibly into that higher tier, but I still would need to see them against some of the best teams. But it would be a really, really big win for them. So I'm going to go with the Heretics.
Yep, I'm taking Miami here too. Could be a situation, just based on that the match on Saturday that we are both pretty uncertain on between Boston and LAG. If Boston comes out on fire and that one takes that one, they could have momentum on their side here, especially if Miami does drop to Seattle. But either way, this could be another close one, kind of between teams that we want to see how Miami stacks up against some of the higher rated teams. Not necessarily saying that's where Boston is, but we just still getting a feel for where Miami truly is at, and some of these matches this week might give us a better sense of what they're capable of. So this is maybe more of a test than some of their other matches, but yeah, we'll have to see how it goes. I'm going to take Miami
For sure. Pick'em records as of now. Obviously, this hasn't been changed at all for the last few weeks. But just as a reminder, you are 14-7 after a 7-3 second week. I also went 7-3 that week, but I had a really, really strong opening week. So I'm up by 3 games right now, 17-4. This is definitely the best that I've done in Pick'em. At any point in my time, I almost went undefeated. I think Vegas really screwed me that first week, and I don't think I'll ever be able to truly forgive them. But yeah, that's where the Pick'em stands right now. We did forget some things when we were putting together the notes that we should at least touch on before we get out of here. The first of which is challengers, because if you remember, obviously we talked about game battles being shut down by Activision. I believe that's coming up pretty soon. And the announcement came about a month or so ago, and that has really changed the complexion of challengers, which has been set up to go through game battles, and that was essentially how everything would work. With game battles going away, challengers were kind of thrown into a state of flux, and Daniel Say, the Call of Duty GM or Call of Duty League GM, he said at the time that they would have more updates on challengers, and then he just went silent for the next month or so, leaving everybody in limbo. He tweeted on the 4th that the team was getting back in office and excited to resume matches next weekend. Quote, as we come out of break, getting challengers info out remains our team's top priority. Wish I could provide a more definitive timeline, but it feels like we're just about at the finish line of getting the new platform in place. Rest assured, this is being worked on daily, and thank you for the continued patience. Obviously, people are not pleased, and understandably so. I don't really put this at the feet of Daniel Say or any single person that we know of, at Activision that is like involved with the CDL. Like, I'm not gonna be in Spinna Spence's DMs talking about how he's not doing enough to help challengers. This seems like it's pretty obviously a top level decision to shut down game battles and therefore completely change how challengers works. We've also heard all of the rumors that the challenger system will be set up through Faceit, which is obviously more well known for CSGO and its integration in Counter-Strike. I don't think that there's going to be any anti-cheat integration like it is with Counter-Strike, but that would be a welcome addition to Call of Duty, especially challengers. I'm sure every Every at least legitimate challengers player would probably really enjoy that aspect, but I don't think we're getting it. But hopefully things get worked out like ASAP because we are not that far away from the first Challengers Open in Boston, and people are gonna get they all I've already seen a bunch of tweets about how annoyed people are that every week, every day that there isn't new challengers information, then that's kind of another day, another week of uncertainty for players that have more uncertainty than anybody else in the scene. Pro players know that they're playing their matches at a certain day, at a certain time. They're getting paid a certain amount of money. That is not the reality for challengers players. So they obviously should be afforded that certainty and have some kind of information out there. I don't know if you had any thoughts on this and challenges in general as the league tries to transition over to a new system.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of, touched on it briefly, but my main thinking of it is like this first Challengers event is coming up at the end of this month with the first major in Boston, and the biggest question mark is if there's no, challenger system set up beforehand, like what do you do with that tournament? Are we just like throwing team names in a hat to pick seedings out or something? Like, um, and in a world where even if like tomorrow the CDL team announces some sort of system to try and do the equivalent to what used to be like CDL points or pro points, to try and help with seeding and whatnot, that's still less than a month for teams to try and put something together. And we had like in the past, challengers was super hectic with roster changes just because team players weren't signed to contracts for these amateur rosters, and they would kind of just flip squads and have consistent roster media to try and get on a team with the most points, put them in a position to be in the winners bracket for the challengers event, so they're in the better position to make money at the event, because at the end of the day that's really the only way they are making money. So the longer that we delay any sort of announcement about any challenger system before this first event, that's only hurting these teams and the flow of the first challengers event more. um and I think there's been reports and stuff on how many challengers events there potentially would be this year. I think it was less than the number of majors, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I think it's
I
only
don't think.
supposed to be like 2 or 3 challengers
Yeah,
events.
and so like if this first event, I don't want to say it's chalked because I still think Boston's going to do the best they can
They'll do it.
given, with what they're capable of. It's still not an ideal circumstance. And if that's a third of the events realistically for the entire season for these challengers, like that's just not a great start. So, really tough situation. I commend the amateurs who are still, sticking to it and trying to make something happen. And it seems like blow after blow for these challengers players over the years, just getting dealt crappy hands, for lack of a better term, and just rolling with the punches. But yeah, we're gonna have to see what happens in that regard ASAP, because it's clock's ticking, and it's really now that I'm thinking about it more, even what I think Game Battles closes on the 15th or something like that, like we realistically could have had like at a minimum a couple like 2K 5K tournaments on Game Battles, or had that pro point ladder. I know those weren't like the favorite systems or anything, but we could have at least had that up until that point to just have something to base the seedings on heading into Boston. um and it could have been some sort of system where maybe that like the GB shutdown was the cutoff for those points, and then the new system gets implemented the next day, and then it's some sort of like average between the two systems. I don't really know.
Mhm.
Just something I'm thinking about literally on the spot here, but that's kind of even more concerning to me, just that it wasn't even. I don't want to say it wasn't even considered, because obviously we don't know if it was or wasn't. But they at least that's something that could have like very easily been done. I feel like is just kept the pro point ladder on GB, and that's not even you know consisting of hosting tournaments necessarily. Or if they had a couple tournaments, just something to have some sort of seeding there for this first tournament, because like I said, it's happened in the past. But let's just say we were, for example, we've talked about like Temp's team. Vance's team and stuff like that. Like if there's one qualifying tournament for this example here, before this challengers land and those squads get top 32, like they're in a crappy position, even if on paper they seemingly are some of the most talented challenger squads. And that's not even taking into account potentially playing hackers and cheaters online and all that. So it's a mess. The more I'm talking about it here, the more I'm just thinking about everything that could go wrong. And yeah, it's really tough situation.
On top of, not having like pro points or any kind of seeding or whatever, like it's a path to pro system. And right now there is no path to pro. The competitions are scrims, and players have been telling fans for years not to treat scrims as competition. Don't count them. Don't use map count in scrims and try to say, well, this team is better than that team, because it's practice. You're supposed to make mistakes. You're supposed to try new things in practice. So, but right now, the only way that a challengers player would have any proof that they're doing well or that they might be worthy of a professional, a professional player spot, a CDL spot, would be scrims. And I think that's a ridiculous idea in general. And it really shows how poorly Activision has treated challengers players. I think CDL players have a lot of complaints, and valid ones at that, about the way Activision has handled the CDL in general. But challengers players have been screwed over time and time again, and it really does feel like it's gotten worse year over year over year for challengers players, and this is the worst example of it, because essentially there has been no challengers this year. Nothing challengers has not existed to this point, despite Daniel saying, well, we're gonna release information at some point, but it's already January. Like there's a decent chance that ranked play and challengers will be announced at the same time, or ranked play will be released into the game at the same time. I think that's just a ridiculous idea, and just Activision has done such a horrible job at being a host, being like trying to foster one of the most important things that you can. Like if you're going to commit to having a path to pro system, you actually have to commit to it. If you don't want to commit to it, tell the NCAA or whoever you want to, like, hey, can do this. We had the College COD League, and I think that's pretty much dead now, because of eFuse's like layoffs and all that. So we don't have that, and there's really no other option for these players, with no game battles. So it's pretty much just playing CMG tourneys and hosts and streaming scrims. It's just such a bad look for competitive Call of Duty. Before, what'd you say?
I was just gonna say, Trim did mention in chat too that you said at least orgs are hosting their own cups, like the FaZe Cup finals are right now.
Yeah.
And I just saw a tweet. It was from Fellow. I'm already scrolling to find it. I didn't know if it said he was playing or if he was like watch partying it or whatnot. Let's see. It says verse FaZe Black, which is
it's ASIM's team.
ASIM's team, yeah. So it sounds like Fellow's playing it. So if any of you guys watching this stream and you want to help support challengers like you can head on over to Fellow stream at least and watch some challengers action for the finals there.
Yeah, I mean, it is really cool that some of the CDL teams have taken a real responsibility about trying to do more for challengers. Boston, despite being one of the newest teams in the league, has done an incredible job, and I give them all the credit in the world. They have fielded more academy rosters than most other teams have, despite only being in the league like 2 years. They've hosted more Challengers Open events than pretty much everybody in the league combined. Toronto has also done a really good job in that regard. And I think Optic hosted one last year, a Challengers Open. So, and we'll see who does it this year. But like a real kudos to those organizations for not just ignoring, like I think Boston sold like 100 or close to it, 100 team passes for their open event, which that shows like there are a ton of people that are willing to spend, $200-$300 plus obviously, but like just for the team pass, and then they're going to spend all of that money to drive or fly to an event, stay in a hotel, and compete in the hopes of becoming a pro player or winning money or just having a good time competing at the highest level that they can at that time. That shows that competitive COD is still really healthy in that regard, that there's so many people still trying to get there, still willing to spend that money. It just sucks that we're like there isn't really any challengers. There's no better way for these people to kind of spend their time or try to progress in competitive Call of Duty. So it's disappointing, but it is kind of promising to see the orgs and the players still be committed to doing something and trying to make this space better. Trem did say also thoughts on how league matches still have to be manually set up. I mean, like we're probably never gonna get any other way on in the CDL at least. He said thoughts on the potential of CDL ending. I've said that before, and I think I was texting you and I was like, well, we could do some kind of like predictions thing for like 2024, and that was gonna be my biggest, boldest prediction, if you even want to call it that. But my prediction was that 2024 is the year that the CDL in its current format dies, and then whatever forms after that will happen then. That just seems like the most logical thing for everybody involved. But I'm not, I don't think it matters one way or the other, because it's not like if we stay with this current format that the CDL will, or that COD will like die in the way that some other people probably might think it will. But I also I think it's better. We would be better off if we didn't have the format that we did right now.
No, I think the one element that is kind of, I don't want to say it's a silver lining, but just the streaming deal for exclusivity on YouTube this season. Part of me wants to believe, and I could be being naive, but part of me wants to believe that it wouldn't just be a 1-year deal. The other part of me would say it would potentially be a multi-year deal for Call of Duty esports and not the CDL, quote unquote, necessarily.
Yeah.
And I think all of that, the the nitty gritty details of whatever that deal is stuff we'll never actually know the answers to. But I guess that's just part of, me being hopeful that it isn't the end of the CDL, but at the same time, it might be time for, just something new and to try and get back to the roots. But I think there's still a lot of uncertainty, even in a world where we move on from the CDL. Like you look at Overwatch, and obviously Overwatch didn't really have the history that Call of Duty esports had before the OWL and the CDL respectively. But like I know I'm not a huge Overwatch esports fan, but like I don't really know what's going on for them. I think there's been reports of like potentially different organizations or tournament organizers trying to set stuff up, but I don't know if like tournaments have actually started or anything like that. And I think the same thing would happen with COD, and it might be a world where people are saying like, "Oh, Adam Apicella, come save us" and stuff like that. But who knows how long something like that would even take? If that's kind of like a best case scenario sort of deal. But yeah, I think it's kind of weird to talk about the potential end of the CDL when the season's really just about to get started, even though it started a couple weeks ago, but took the break, and now we're really getting into the swing of it. But yeah, that's gonna be something we'll have to keep our eyes on and keep our ears out for anything in that regard. Probably, I mean, they haven't even announced when Champs is this year. I think one of the majors is in June, if I remember looking at the schedule. So we might be looking at like champs in July or early August, which early August would probably be like the latest it would be. So any news about the future of the CDL would come, I'll say like August at the bare minimum. And with the history of this past season, how long it took to get certain details about this season after champs last year, anything is possible once the season actually wraps up.
It might be next August 2025. But what I'm thinking, and I think you bring up a good point about the media rights deal. If it is a multi-year deal, we don't know. Obviously, that's something that's, we're just essentially speculating on it. But if it is a multi-year deal, I do think it would be in the vein of, we will host the premier Call of Duty League action, or whatever the top Call of Duty esports is. We will cover that. Or Activision has a deal, you're covering our esport. Obviously, it might not be the same. It might not have Optic Texas. It might have Optic Gaming. It might not have Atlanta FaZe. It'll have FaZe Clan, essentially. That's what I'm looking at. And I think the next version of the CDL or COD Esports, whatever it's going to be called, I think they should just stick with the CDL. That just seems like the best idea. But the next version will be essentially what they have in Halo, with the Halo Championship Series, where I'm looking at the roadmap for 2023, so the season that they just got done playing in October. They had an event in Charlotte in February, and then they had an online event hosted by one of their partner teams. Obviously, they don't have franchise teams, but they have FaZe Clan, Quadrant, Optic Gaming, all these other very well-known esports organizations. So they have an online tournament hosted by one of the teams in April, and then another online tournament hosted by another team in May, and then they go to DreamHack in June, and they play an invitational at DreamHack, and then one of the other teams will host a major, and then they'll do another team-hosted major or tournament, and then they'll go to another city and do the same thing over again before a world championship at the end of the year, which Halo does it in Seattle because of Microsoft. Now Microsoft owns Activision, so there is a connection here with Microsoft and Halo and Call of Duty. And Microsoft doesn't have a great deal of experience with esports in general, and Call of Duty would be the biggest esport that they've had kind of the opportunity to run or direct, because Halo has not been, Halo has kind of done well at certain points, but from a consistent basis, I don't think that they've really done super well. Same with Gears of War. I think that's under the Xbox Studios. So Call of Duty would be kind of the biggest thing, but I think the Halo Championship Series, with the way that they've set it up, I think that would be the best way to go about a post CDL or a post franchising era. Obviously, all of this is speculation, so I have absolutely no idea, but that's just something that I think will happen. That's what I'm predicting will happen, but obviously we have a ton of time until that would actually, even possibly occur. Like you said, the last major, the fourth major, is set for June, late June. So champs would be in July at some point, most likely, maybe mid-July. And then the way we got information this year, it took us 4 months. So we might have to wait until October, November of 2024 to get any kind of information. Hopefully not, but I definitely wouldn't put it past Activision or Microsoft in this case. I don't know much about how Microsoft communicates. But yeah, I don't know if I thank you, Trim, for the questions. I don't know if we had anything else to add. But that did end up filling quite a bit of time that I wasn't expecting. I was about to wrap up the show until we got onto this little spiel. But thank you, and Happy New Year to every single person that has been watching or listening to the Ego Chall Podcast. We are now 101 episodes deep into the podcast, and of course, we really appreciate each and every one of you. If you could, please subscribe or follow the podcast feed wherever you're listening on. If you're watching on YouTube, please like and subscribe to the channel. Follow us on Twitter at jbink with 2Ks. I'm at Pres Byers, and the podcast Twitter is at Ego Chall Podcast. If you want to watch the live stream, you can do so on YouTube. And you can also do so at twitch.tv/Ego Chall Podcast. The VODs, all of the VODs are on YouTube, and then I think the most recent one is always on the Twitch channel. But YouTube is probably the better way to go about it. If you did not watch or listen to the solo non-episode I did over the holiday break, you can go back and listen or watch that. I believe it's called The Call of Duty League Has Failed Us, which is a very fitting way to kind of end this episode after the discussion we just had. But you can go do that if you so please. We will probably be back next. We'll definitely be back next week. The day we do the live show and that it will hit the podcast feed, that is kind of up in the air. If you've been following me on Twitter, you know that I started a new job. So the schedule is completely different from when I worked at Dot. So things have kind of changed in that regard, and just trying to figure out when is the best time for both Bink and I to, fit our schedules together to do these podcasts. But rest assured, we will keep doing the podcast. We'll keep doing it every week. We'll give our predictions, give our reactions. So don't worry about any of that. It just might be different times or different days that you'll see the podcast episodes. But either way, thank you so much for listening. And Bink, take it away.
Yeah, I don't got much to add. Thank you guys as always for all the support. I was just going to point out what Preston said too, is that now things might be at a little bit different time of day depending on how our schedules worked out. So the best way to stay up to date with when we'll be going live or when the next episode will be is following us on Twitter, like he said. So yeah, other than that, I don't got much else. I'm looking forward to an exciting weekend of the CDL being back in action, just a couple of weeks away from first LAN of MW3, so we're getting into it here. So thank you guys as always, and remember to send the chow.